welcome back for this week's fourth installment of the Peachtree Shared Space project. If you've joined us at all for any of our other events and activities this week, thank you for returning. And if this is your first time joining us this week, welcome. We're glad that you're here and have chosen to spend your a little bit of time on your Thursday evening with us. My name is Kevin Bacon. I'm the director of our Department of City Planning's Office of Design. Our department is leading this redesign effort for Peachtree Shared Space that we're calling the Peachtree Shared Space Study. To give a little bit of background on the project for those that are joining us for the first time, the start of this really goes all the way back to 2016 when our brand new pop-up urban design studio, the Atlanta City Studio, among many of its first projects that we were tasked to take on, was asked to deal with the very simple question of why doesn't our main street, our Peachtree Street, work like a main street? Why doesn't it feel that way? It certainly accommodates big events and at times has that feel of a downtown, but doesn't really function and feel that way every day. It's no small challenge to take on, but we spent the next couple of years really digging into that question with our team of designers and talking informally to some individuals around Peachtree residents, property owners, to kind of get their takes on that, and had heard a lot of different responses about how they thought the street should be designed and who should be accommodated, and really came to the conclusion that if you were really going to, how do you design a public space for everyone, understanding that if in a growing city such as Atlanta, where a lot of that growth would want to happen in our downtown if designed properly, what is a public space that accommodates people living in downtown and not just cars, that people that are living there, working there, eating there, and just experiencing downtown. And that took us to looking at unconventional ways of thinking about public space, including an idea of shared spaces. And we'll talk some about what we mean to that this evening, as we've done all week long. But really latching onto this idea as a shared space, because it was less about dedicating lanes for different users and really about how you experience public space and design a public space cohesively. So we're here at the next step of that process, where we had floated that idea over a Streets Alive and other events, and felt like there was enough momentum to go forward, and now are working with a design team led by Tool to take this to the next step. Understanding that there are real world implications of redesigning your main street, including shared spaces, and looking at the technical side of what would be required, traffic patterns, obviously, being one of those. Conducting broader community engagement to make sure we're hearing from everybody and thinking about this from all angles, and really, refining the design and thinking about, not just the Peachtree Center section that we really zeroed in on the early work, but thinking about, the entire Peachtree Street corridor of downtown from Marietta Street to North Avenue. It's not an insignificant section of street to take on, and there's no one strategy that necessarily solves for all of that. So really opening up the box with the intent of coming back with a much more solid idea of how and what we think this could look like, and advancing it to something that we would like to fund and implement and see built in our downtown, and hopefully all be out there one day enjoying. So and not just ending with Peachtree Street, but for all of our public spaces in downtown. So I think I'll leave it there for this evening. We're excited that you've come back, because we've had a lot of great conversations this week. And really what we want to do tonight is talk about a lot of the things that we've heard, and some of the things that we've started drawing this week to help advance those ideas. In the design world, we call this a pinup. They're just a starting point for ideas and where we'll be going, quick reactions on what we've heard, but we're eager to, while ideas are fresh, to hear from everybody. So I'll turn it over to Addie. Am I going to you next? Just to make introductions, we're joined by our consultant team of Tool Design with their entire team that's been working with us this week. We selected them because they're deep experience and expertise on public space, and their views on this very much aligned with ours, and excited to have them with us. So I will turn it to Addie to talk us through what we're going to be doing this evening.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And welcome to the folks back who have been with us throughout the week, and to those, a couple of folks I see are new names to us. Welcome to the Peachtree Shared Street Community Pinup. Our team has been working tirelessly behind the Zoom facade to develop some of these concepts and ideas to get your reaction to them tonight. So we're very excited. I'm going to be sharing my screen. This is a Miro board. This is where we have been pinning up all of our ideas, moving through. So those of you who joined us before know it's a little bit different than your typical PowerPoint, and you can see some of my colleagues here moving their cursor around in the other realm. But tonight we really want to present to you just starter ideas, get your feedback on what you like, what you don't like, what's missing, so we can move this to the next step. Tonight we're just a little bit of a welcome, which we gave earlier. What is a shared space? We spoke about this, Ian Lockwood spoke about this on Monday night, which seems like forever ago, but only a couple days ago. What we heard this week, Megan McMullen's going to be leading us off to speak about that, and then jump into the starter ideas. Again, we are looking at our segment of Peachtree from Marietta Street to the south, all the way to North Avenue. This is a segment that we've really been focused on for this project. Again, we have three major deliverables. We have an illustrative concept report that really builds on the work that the City Design Studio had done in 2016. We'll fold that into a draft GDOT concept report, which will really help position the city for funding long-term. The most recent thing you'll see, or the most current thing you're going to see, is the demonstration project. We're looking at a spring timeframe for that demonstration project, which will illustrate some of the concepts that we're speaking about tonight, and hear from you kind of what we want to test and move that forward. A little in our schedule, we are still at the beginning. We're at the existing conditions and technical analysis. So that means we're looking at where folks are going, how vehicles are moving through the space, where are the hot spots for pedestrians, what's happening economically and in the market along the corridor. So we're going to take everything that we heard during this workshop and go back behind the scenes, flesh it out a lot more. There's a lot more work that needs to be done, and then come back to you in January with a refined concept on where this shared space should be. So we're really excited. We're still at the beginning of the process, and we hope you guys stay with us throughout this entire process, which we're looking at beginning of summer endpoint for this particular study. With that, I'm going to turn it right on over to Ian Lockwood to talk a little bit about shared spaces. For those new to us, hopefully this will be new, and for those who are joining us, just rehash what we're here for. Ian?
Thanks, Addie. Yes, shared space. So shared space, by the implication of share, means it's for everybody. It's a democratic space where everybody is welcome and feels comfortable. So it doesn't matter if you have a disability, or if you're an elderly person, or a woman, or a man, you will feel comfortable in the space. We're focusing mostly on the needs of residents and business people who work downtown and locals. And we're going to try and make this space as cool as we can, and that would attract visitors as well. But it's really focused on all the different types of folks in Atlanta who want to use this space. And if you just shift over to the right a little bit, this is a space, and you can see it's an older location, but you can see all the people walking and socializing, just regular folk enjoying this space, doing their business. And this happens to be on our corridor just over 100 years ago, and you can see the same views in the background. And so it was a shared space for most of its history. In fact, most of the larger streets in Atlanta were shared spaces for the majority of the history of the city. And so what we're trying to do is kind of restore this kind of dignity of the public realm, where all different folks can get along. And what happened was, starting in the 30s through 50s, is that cars were invented and became popular and started dominating the place, and the street was slowly evolved to be mostly about cars, and people relegated to the edges. And so what we'd like to do is is get back to this sort of shared space and then reintroduce cars into it, and where they can behave like everybody else and everyone can get along. And on the bottom left, there's there's examples of streets where they were shared spaces back in their history, and then post World War II in particular, they got specialized for motor vehicle use, and then they got put back to their shared space so they could fulfill their potential, economically and socially and culturally. And then on the right down there is an image of a street that we've drawn on top of. And a shared space has some parts. There's the comfort zones where folks do most of the walking and exchange. There's the shared zone where people walk, but vehicles are also allowed. And then one thing that we're improving on is adding tactile guidance to this flush environment, because the whole place is nice for people in wheelchairs or pushing carriages because there's no vertical obstacles. But that creates some challenges for people who can't see. And so this technology of these tactile guides are really helpful so that we can make a map that people can follow in the paving through textures, and they can find it, where they want to go, and the crossings and that kind of thing. So it's a very equitable space for everybody involved. So that's sort of a thumbnail of the idea of shared spaces.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Megan. I work at Tool Design with Addie and Ian, and I'm going to give us the quick rundown on everything we've been hearing throughout this week with all of our different sessions. So this week, like Addie was saying, is our discovery workshop. So it's really been focused on uncovering what the issues and opportunities are and collaborating with you all about what your dreams are for this corridor before we move into the design, so that we have all those components in mind and can really be on the right track. So we had our community kickoff meeting on Monday, sort of an overview of the project. On Tuesday, we talked about the demonstration project in Tactical Urbanism 101. Yesterday, a lot of you joined us for a small group collaboration in our virtual open studio to talk about specific locations and ideas. And tonight, we're debriefing you on all of that with our community pinup session. We also held stakeholder interviews and have a community input map up online that you can still participate in. Through this process, we talked to 46 different people for stakeholder interviews. We had 196 people register for our virtual meetings. We've gotten 200 map comments so far, and that's still open for another week or so keep them coming. We've had over 1,600 people visit our website. So trying to connect with as many different groups of people as we can, from students to residents, property owners, and a lot of you public space lovers of Atlanta who just really want to make sure we have the best public realm that we can. So coming out of those conversations, a few core values started to bubble up of the way that we want to approach Peachtree Street, that it would be something that's safe for all users, that it would be a vibrant place that's really dynamic and attractive and people want to spend time. It should be inclusive and equitable for all different types of people. One thing that we heard coming up a lot was that it should be focused on serving neighbors and workers first and tourists second. So really having more of that local neighborhood feel. It should be a flexible space that can function for the everyday use and for special occasions, can be modified to suit the purpose. And that it needs to be context sensitive. And our entire study area, that North Avenue to Marietta Street, has a lot of different character areas, and that we need to treat each of them appropriately to respond to their surroundings. We have a few different little buckets of themes that we've been hearing. You'll see there's some sticky notes on here. I'm not going to touch on every single note, but I'll pull some of the highlights from each of these. So one of the main themes that we heard repeatedly in every conversation was the need to activate this space, both through permanent activation with more storefronts and businesses, and also within the public space. We heard from a lot of people who want there to be special events and programs happening, a lot of love for Atlanta Streets Alive and wanting more things like that. But we did hear that the permitting process for things can be a little bit cumbersome. So trying to make that simpler for people to encourage more creativity and spontaneity with programming. We also heard that people want more of the everyday neighborhood type of functions beyond those special events. Things like a regularly occurring farmers market or artist market that every Saturday you can wake up, go grab your coffee there, see the people of the city, and really enjoy that urban lifestyle. You can't really talk about activation of this space without talking about the business component. We know that there are a lot of great businesses already operating in this corridor. Some of them are embracing Peachtree Street and have their fronts facing that way, but a lot of them have more of an interior focus. The way that the buildings were designed in the middle of last century was more interior orientation. And so a lot of people wanted to have more transparency. So you have windows on the fronts of buildings and you can actually see what's going on inside, take a peek into the store, more patios for outdoor dining, just more of an interaction between all of those businesses and the street. So it feels more active, as well as getting more local businesses. For housing, the main thing was that we just need more people living down here. There are some residents of downtown. I think we have a number of you on the call, but people want to get you some more neighbors so that there is more of a neighborhood feel happening downtown. Of course, it's the chicken and the egg scenario with people thinking about where they live, wanting retail, and retailers wanting people already living there. So a bit of a dichotomy there. The other issue that was brought up frequently was the need to support and house the growing number of unhoused people in downtown Atlanta. Nature was something that people were excited to talk about, both in terms of the feel-good stuff and the functionality. We all know that being outside and seeing a little spot of green makes us feel a little bit better pretty instantaneously. So there were a lot of requests to increase the number of trees downtown, to add more flowers that would have colorful different blossoms so that it would feel more cheerful downtown. But then also things like using green infrastructure, which is a way that you can design the landscape so that it actually manages some of the flooding during big storms, and takes some pressure off of the other systems. So it's great for the environment and it looks good. A lot of people talked about wanting more ambiance downtown. We heard from many people who felt it was a little too blah. The words dull and drab came up fairly often when referring to the building and the materials in this area. And there were requests for less beige, more color. So doing that through both the design of the buildings and the urban spaces, but also through art. People want it to be playful and bright, have a mix of permanent installations that are iconic on an international level, as well as some temporary pieces rotating in and out. And of course, with all of that, celebrating our local artists and the history of Atlanta, so that when you come to downtown, you know exactly where you are. You know that it feels just like Atlanta. For a transportation project, movement, while important, was not as important to people as the public space issues, that at least with the group that we've been talking to. But it was pretty clear that people want this to function like an urban space, where walking, biking, and transit are the priority modes of transportation, and driving is definitely still allowed and accommodated, but it's not the priority. That means we want to do things like have universal design, like Ian was talking about, to make it easy for people to get throughout spaces, no matter what type of mobility limitations they may have. It also means that we need to think about how the entire network works for downtown so that we can take some functions off of Peachtree Street that are less a priority, things like loading activities, and get those to a location that's a little bit more appropriate. So things like converting some of the existing one-way streets to two-way will make it easier for those buildings to access all different sides of the buildings, so that they can do their loading in a more effective way. When it comes to design, everyone wanted us to make sure that we really pay attention to user behavior. It's one thing to design a space that looks pretty and feels good, but if it doesn't line up with the way people actually operate in a space, it's not much good. So paying attention to the way that people typically move through intersections and really designing the city in a way that aligns with that. Another note on that was the need for more public restrooms and potentially some showers as well. When it came to the demonstration project, people were most excited about the elements that incorporated outdoor dining and seating areas, really focusing on the activation side of the project, while also being interested in testing how would traffic operate in a scenario where we do reduce the number of lanes for a limited amount of time and really see how people are able to respond. On the political side of things, we did hear from people that there was a little bit concerned that maybe this wouldn't happen as fast as we would want. They want it to be a priority for the city so it gets moving quickly, which means we need some committed political champions to really push it through, as well as on the private side with some of our businesses and philanthropic supporters helping to make improvements in the public realm, as well as investing in art and programming for the space. So you all found our website, that's how you got here, but we'll keep that updated as we move forward. Again, that community input map will be open through the 29th. You'll see us in your inbox soon with an update once we post all of the debrief materials from this on the website and have our upcoming photo challenge that we'd love for you to participate in. As Addie mentioned, we'll have another workshop week likely in January. We're finalizing the date on that right now, but that one will be really focused on the design and getting into the nitty-gritty of the selected location. And then our demonstration project will be coming up in the spring as well.
Thanks, Megan. And sorry for the little hiccup in technology. It seems like the internet is just at its max capacity these past few days. Wanted to spend a few minutes highlighting the overall corridor. What you're going to see in a few moments from our design team is really focusing on the segments along Peachtree Street that we had spoken about throughout the week. Segment 1, which is really from Pine Street to North Avenue. Segment 2, which we're calling the Connector Crossing, which is from Pine Street all the way down a little bit past Mayor's Park. Segment 3, which is the Peachtree Center piece. And then segment 4, which is from Margaret Mitchell Square down to Marietta. While we're going to be talking about these individual pieces, we are thinking about this corridor holistically. We know that no one cross section is going to fit every single block, nor is it going to fit every single parcel along the corridor. So really being context sensitive. So making sure that we're illustrating what's happening with the buildings, with the frontage around the space, how people are using the space today, how they could be using it in the future. And so we're going to take a deeper dive into that. At a high level, we're looking at 4 to 5 lanes are currently along the corridor. What we're seeing from our initial analysis is the level of traffic along the corridor as it stands today, pre-pandemic, is not warranted a 4 or 5 lane road. It's really more in line of a 2 or 3 lane road. So how do we begin to take that space and rebalance it to more active uses to the edges to get people out and about? Currently, we're looking, as part of this process, looking at how do we drop those lanes down? Where does that happen? We start up here at North Avenue. So North Avenue is here. Marietta Street is down here. As we move from north to south, we're looking at 3 lanes through the Emory Hospital area. We have known that traffic going southbound on Peachtree Street, most of it moves towards the connector at Linden and Pine Street. So that really is a sweet spot for 3 lanes to the north, transitioning to 2 lanes at the connector crossing area, and even all the way down to Baker Street. Once it hits Baker Street, we're looking at this becoming the shared space. This is the space where all vehicles and all people can operate with a curbless streets. How that actually operates and the details of that is something that we will be determining later on. But from there south, it's really up to you guys to kind of tell us, where does this shared space begin? Where does it end? And how we can move forward with that. So to kick it off, and I might need to update, I think, my board a little bit, we're going to jump into segment 1. And this segment is from North Avenue down to Pine Street. This is the area around the hospital, Emory Hospital. We've talked with several folks at Emory Hospital, looking at their master plan, what's the bigger plan for the area, looking at how people are moving through the space and what historic qualities they have of the buildings throughout there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Eric Childs, who is going to walk us through segment 1.
Thanks,
as I can
Addie.
get the map kind of up and running. I apologize.
Thanks, Addie. And thanks, everybody. So just to describe the character of this segment, which again goes from North to Pine, it's typically 4 or 5 lanes, mostly 5. It narrows to 4 in one small segment above Renaissance Parkway. As Addie mentioned, Linden and Pine provide access to the connector. And the Emory Hospital campus has a major presence here. They own most of the land, particularly on the west side of the street of Peachtree. And currently, the vast majority of their staff and visitors enter on Peachtree Street. And while their master plan does call for that to change, it could be some time before that gets realized. And of course, we have the North Avenue MARTA station at the very north part of our corridor. And so what we heard when we had a virtual open studio, we heard that this area could use some softening through street trees, through colorful landscape planting, as Megan was discussing. There was some concern about the number of vacancies, that this feels like more of a place to move through. And there's a desire for more street-facing activity. And we certainly heard enthusiasm for having bicycle facilities here, as well as a more comfortable and interesting pedestrian experience. And people noted the uptick of biking, particularly during the pandemic. So in terms of the goals that we are trying to accomplish with this segment, in thinking holistically about the entire Peachtree Avenue corridor here, this segment's trying to tee up that transition that we want to make from 4 or 5 lanes down to eventually 2 lanes. And we certainly want to make sure that our work meshes with the Emory Hospital campus master plan, which again, we've spoken to them and reviewed the plan. And there are kind of 2 focus areas that we ended up identifying that we'll need to continue looking at, but the mid-block crossing at Emory Hospital, as well as the Pine Street intersection, which would mark the transition between this segment 1 and 2. So Addie, if you could zoom in on that section and plan vignette there, I can talk through some of the design elements that we came up with.
Sure, and I apologize because the aerial is not popping up, but can I pause right here? Will that work for you?
Yeah, that's perfect. All right, so the idea here is that south of Linden Avenue, we would want to provide a 3-lane section that's 2 lanes north and southbound with a center median, along with protected bike lanes that are also northbound and southbound. Planters or vertical elements would protect cyclists from vehicular traffic, and those would be 6-foot wide bike lanes, with the protected zones being 4 feet wide. We would want to paint those protected zones to help visually narrow the roadway. And we also think that the center median could be painted or be a type of paver that contrasts with the roadway surface. And so the intent here is to rebalance the street for all users. And what we're trying to do is respect the need to provide access to the hospital, because again, the patient entrance is right off of Peachtree, and currently most employees and visitors to the hospital access it off of Peachtree. We're also trying to respect the fact that Linden Avenue is a major connector to, a major thoroughfare to the downtown connector. So, when we were looking at the traffic data, something like half of I think 49% of the traffic going southbound on Peachtree turns off onto Linden on the way to the connector. So, so I think that's why we're trying to start the 3-lane section south of that point, and then that helps tee up segment 2, which is what Bonnie will talk about next.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to segment 2, from Pine Street to Porter Place. The 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, continue in this segment. And a little bit about the character of this area. This is considered an area by most as a connection from midtown to downtown. And currently, folks are seeing it as a space that users move through, but not necessarily a destination. We heard that folks feel safe in this space, but not necessarily, they don't necessarily enjoy moving through this space. It doesn't feel quite comfortable. So we set some goals for the area. First of all, to instill some vibrancy. Second, to draw interest. So do something with this bridge that entices folks to want to cross it. We'd also like to reclaim some of the space if we're able to get down to 2 lanes, reallocate that space to pedestrians and cyclists through retrofitting the existing design that's there. Along with that, we'd like to calm traffic to ensure that vehicular traffic is going at appropriate speed, and as well as improve crossings through this segment and folks' access to transit. So we do recognize there are some intersections here that aren't easy to get through as a pedestrian. And lastly, we heard a lot about creating a space that's more in tune with the human scale. So instead of these wide roadways with a lot of lanes, something that feels a little bit more comfortable for folks. So starting north of the bridge, we've got a cross section, a little bit of a before and after here. We currently do have bike lanes throughout this entire segment, and they're buffered, but we don't have any sort of vertical separation or protection for cyclists from vehicular traffic. So the idea here would be to put in some sort of planter or vertical element that's protecting cyclists and widening those bike lanes, since we have the room, making them 8 feet. So we're able to allow more cyclists and scooters to move through the space. With the additional room, we'd also love to extend the sidewalks. And here you can see some images of some retrofit sidewalks, so that at sidewalk level, you get a little bit more space to move. If there's joggers or walkers, they've got a little bit more space to move through this segment of the corridor. Now let's move over to the bridge. So currently there is a jersey barrier with a planter that separates the sidewalk from the roadway, but the cyclists don't have any sort of protection other than a painted buffer. So below you can see a plan view and a cross section of the green would be spaces that you move through. So those would be travel lanes and the bike lanes, which would be widened out to 8 feet. And then the orange are buffered areas. So you've got maybe planters or some sort of vertical art element that's drawing folks' eye from the roadway out to the bridge and makes them feel invited into this space. And then a center median with ideally some sort of planter with a tree to narrow that roadway and make sure that traffic is calmed through the area. And finally, well, one more point, sorry. If you'll look at the photos to the right, you can see a couple different temporary and permanent art installations. I was really inspired by the Hence mural on the Beltline. This is just an underpass, but I think most Atlantans know this is an iconic space for selfies and engagement photos. We would love for this bridge to invoke some sort of fun and exciting selfie element that draws people to the space and gets more people on the bridge.
Yeah, I think Bonnie's just spot on. I mean, we talked a lot about internally on this team of, you know, where do people go to take that Instagrammable photo, or to CAP made a point of what is the B-roll when people come here and start filming for the big sports arenas, what's happening, and why isn't that focus on Peachtree Street? And I think that's a really good point. And how do these elements really start kind of having breadcrumbs, as the James Lima folks talked about, the breadcrumbs that kind of lead you down a really special place and really create that magic that you want in your main street. Sorry, Bonnie, go ahead.
Oh, no, thank you so much. So just south of the bridge to Ralph McGill, you've got 4 lanes of traffic and then a left turn lane. Reallocating that space to 2 travel lanes, you're able to put in a buffer with planters for those cyclists to have protection. And then also in this area, you do have some spaces where the sidewalk is a bit narrow, and you have some street furniture, some lighting in the sidewalk that prohibits some free movement for pedestrians. So extending that idea of extending the sidewalk through here, but also maybe some retrofit bus or transit shelters for folks. And then you can see some images down here. This would be an idea that we could have a floating bus stop. So moving that bike lane in towards the sidewalk and then allowing a space for folks to load at the transit stops down on this end of segment 2.
All right, Bonnie, do you want to jump into segment 3? So this segment 3 is the Peachtree Center from Porter Place to Forsyth Street. This is the piece that the city of Atlanta in their previous work really focused on design-wise. So we wanted to kind of take it back out, take a look at it, get the feedback from everybody that we've spoken to this week, and really identify, is this the right direction for this space? What's needed, what's missing? And Bonnie, go ahead.
Alrighty. So talking to folks this week and what we saw, we really heard that this segment of our study area is considered the heart of downtown. It's got an established density and it's a great place for folks to work. But we did hear that it's lacking in elements for everyday use. So play, art, green spaces, the things that you would normally see on a main street, you don't see here. Folks view this as a space that they move through and not a destination. If they want to be outside, maybe they go to Centennial Park or Woodruff Park, but they don't typically tend to stay here. You've got some difficult crossings at both Baker and Forsyth, and we'd like to use those as opportunities, maybe as the gateways into this space. And lastly, transit's not always easily accessible for folks. Maybe they have an urge to cross mid-block to get to a transit stop or to MARTA, but there's planting or some sort of furniture that's prohibiting them from doing that. And last, the scale of the architecture in the roadway through this space is not reflective of what you would see in a main street. So looking at that character, we've created some goals for this segment. And first is to invoke the feeling of a linear plaza. So if we're viewing this as a shared space, what would you see in a plaza, and how could you design that in a linear fashion that folks are using this area and it's activated throughout? Second, we want to reclaim space for the main street users. So for not necessarily cars, but other things you would see on a main street. Both active and passive play spaces in the area, and then also equitably using this space that considers the uses adjacent to it, which might mean that for those travel spaces for cyclists and motor vehicles, their route might meander a little bit through the space instead of being straight, a direct route from north to south. Lastly, we know that there is some loading and unloading happening in this area. There are some transit stops as well as ride shares happening. So we want to make sure that we maintain that in the area. So moving on, I'll just touch briefly on Hardy Park. We don't have concepts to share for you all yet, but we do see this as a gateway and a transition into what could be the shared space. And we'd like to be able to increase accessibility and visibility into the park, as well as create flexible social elements in this space. Bookending at the other end of Margaret Mitchell Square, we know that we've got some crossing improvements and some elevation to work with in terms of dealing with navigation through that area. But you do have some nice views into the Central Library and Flatiron Building. And we'd really love to play off the library there and make sure that the uses of the square there are reflecting what's happening in the library, that those feel maybe like one space. So looking at our shared space, this is just a quick vignette of what could be in the space. It's not necessarily specific to any spot within this segment, but we've looked at the idea of both flexible elements within the space and static elements. So those flexible elements, the ones we really heard that folks want, would be seating and dining, things that you could move around throughout the space depending on what was happening there. Those can move from one side of the street to the other, or one end of the street to the other. Some play elements could go along with that flexible outlook, and then as interactive art, We heard a lot about the markets and vendors, as you all heard previously. This could be an opportunity. You can see towards this plan view, those two orange buildings to the left, that, you know, temporary spaces that maybe they're open on the weekends, or they come in and they set up and close down during lunchtime or something. And lastly, loading zones. So in this sort of shared space, that would be able to take place throughout this segment. And then more of the static elements, you've got your street trees and your lighting. These things would help to guide folks moving through the space, you know, maybe where is a good idea to ride my bike or to drive my car through, and where should I avoid. Transit stops would be those static elements, and then some play elements. And we've got a couple images here to the right. You know, maybe there are ping pong tables or swings or the type of art that kids can climb on. We heard a lot about folks wanting to have some green space and some space to walk their dogs. So there's a few images towards the bottom here of what, you know, some linear strips of lawn could look like, and how folks could interact with those, as well as perhaps a water feature. You can see there towards the right one that, you know, folks could walk through or rest their feet in during a lunchtime, something like that. And last, I think it's the top left, you can see an image of these long community tables. So, you know, maybe this is an area for folks to be able to work outside together or collaborate. So these are just a few ideas of what could happen in this space.
Thanks, Bonnie. As we move from segment 3 from Peachtree Center, we're going to dive right on into Woodruff Park. And to kick us off with that, I'm going to bring it back to Eric Childs.
All right, so before we dive into the starter concepts, I want to talk about our approach really quickly. We're going to show you several variations of 2 approaches. One approach is a full reconstruction of Woodruff Park and Peachtree as a shared space. The other approach we took is to just look at Peachtree and reconstruct that as a shared space, leaving only minor modifications for Woodruff Park that are in various stages of planning. One approach that we are not showing, but we want to continue to look into it, is retrofitting Peachtree with more short-term measures using street paint, site furnishings, planters, etc., as we've shown in segments 1 and 2, to reclaim space for pedestrians, cyclists, and narrowing the roadway, just to provide a broader range of options. So Addie, if you can zoom into the concept, the first concept there showing the full reconstruction, that would be great. So in this concept, Peachtree and Woodruff Park become a shared space. And the first move that we made was to expand the storefront edge along the west side of Peachtree. The trees would be set back about 25 feet from the building face, and so that provides a generous storefront edge that can be activated with movable seating, street games like table tennis that Bonnie mentioned, planters, and even artistic, interactive artistic elements. You may have heard of these, at least in the design world, these famous musical swings in Montreal, that when you swing on them, they play notes from classical instruments, and the higher you swing, the higher the note. So there's opportunity, there's a lot of creativity in Atlanta, and we'd love to bring, you know, some kind of local flavor to these locations. In terms of how we've thought about the space overall, if we start from 5 Points and Edgewood and the Walgreens down there, we've created this triangular space that we've nicknamed Phoenix Plaza, right in front of the Walgreens, and we envision that as kind of the welcome mat and a central civic space that draws you up into the rest of the corridor. The central portion of the park, which that's where you're going to see the trees and the grassy areas, that portion of the park is a little bit raised. Because if we zoom in a little bit, you'll see that sort of on the southeastern edge, we've incorporated a few stairs. And we did a high-level study of the existing topography here. And we found that currently, if you're standing on Park Place looking toward Peachtree, there's about 6 feet of grade change, and the park slopes up rather severely on that side. So you can't see across the park, which is not the friendliest, and it's from an design perspective, it's a lot more inviting when you can see into the space, and it allows you to feel safer. And so we quickly tried to think about this concept by taking that elevation down, sloping it as much as we could while also keeping it accessible. And that allowed us to cut the number of stairs that we would need in half. And it also allows you to actually see across the park. And again, that contributes to a sense of safety. It makes for a friendlier, more inviting edge. As far as how that central space would be used, we wanted to provide a number of rooms that could be used in different ways. We heard from a number of folks who appreciated the verdant quality of the park, and we wanted to retain that while also creating more space for flexible use. So the center of the park features a vertical sculpture, again, another artistic opportunity, and plaza space, a paved area that can host events, stages, food trucks that can pull right off of Peachtree, and it would kind of have the same surface as Peachtree Avenue itself, so there's a sense of continuity when you're in that space. Grassy squares are just to the north and south of that central plaza, and that's just trying to provide that recreational space that's there now, as well as a soft surface for things like sunbathing when the weather's nice. Adjacent to the grassy squares on either outer edge of those, we're envisioning flexible seating beneath the trees, and we'd have a permeable surface such as pea gravel or decomposed granite, just something that is a little bit softer, and Addie's got her cursor there on an example from the Georgia Tech campus that's pretty nice. And there, if we zoom back in, there's a blue rectangle there toward the bottom of this central area, and that's a water scrim. That's a calming bookend to the green space. And so water scrims are these flat fountains that provide a thin sheet of water that you can walk across, and they have kind of a textured surface, so it's not slippery. It's different from a splash pad, although if the desire was there, we could work that in. But this has more of a calming effect. And that example that Addie's highlighting right now, that's a famous example from Washington, D.C. If we go back to the concept, the northern end of the park is slated to honor several former mayors of Atlanta, and we found that out as we were sketching this. So we were just showing, we'll show this, understanding that if this is an element that, as we move through design, if it's desired, we can think about other locations for it. But essentially, it's just, think of it as an outdoor cafe with picnic tables, or maybe even a beer garden, and street games. And we've got overhead string lighting with again, another vertical artistic element to book in that northern segment of the space. And a small building that could also house, serving areas and whatnot. So if we move on to the bottom concept, this is the Peachtree Avenue shared space. Again, the concept is the same here for the street. Again, providing that generous storefront edge, movable seating, street games, interactive artistic elements, etc. But the difference here is we understand there are minor modifications at various planning stages for Woodruff Park to help improve the edge, as well as provide vehicular access for food trucks. So this is a less intensive approach that still follows through with a shared street concept. So with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague Ian Lockwood to talk about another variation of the shared street.
Thanks, Eric. There are lots and lots of ways of designing shared spaces, and we'll just go to a precedent in Spain. This is a famous square. Addie actually studied here and vacationed here, and Megan lived here for a little while she was studying, so we're familiar with this space. And we're just going to look at a few parts of it, just to get an idea of what a shared space could look like. So here's one of the approaches to that square, and you can see their Flatiron building, and you can see how informal the intersection is. going down. No curbs, no pavement markings, no stop signs. That's looking the other way into the square. See the little delivery vehicle on the right. You know, when that driver went through, I'm sure they were behaving themselves because the environment requires it. Keep moving down, please. And here's the tram line comes into the square, and there's the platform. Very simple. It's the ramp up and a top with some warning surfaces on the edges, a handrail, and it's right there in the square, so people get on and off the tram easily. And this is at the far end of the square, and there's an offset intersection there. So on the left, the intersection is closer to us, the cross street's closer to us, and on the right, it's further away. Again, very informal intersections, no stop signs, no pavement markings, no crosswalks. And look at all the parking on the right-hand side there. Just very bike ped friendly. So let's go to the top of the next column. And this is a shared space as well, with trams running through it. And you see the people socializing and economic exchange going on. And this is actually in Atlanta, and it's in our study area. So this is Peachtree Street, and it was a shared space for most of its history and most of the history of Atlanta. And just regular folks would use it, and it was a really great place of exchange with great views. And so this is the kind of ambiance we're trying to get back. And the only difference is that there'd be motor vehicles using it as well. This view and area was so popular, it actually made 2 postcards. So clearly a point of pride in Atlanta's history. And that's only 3 generations ago, so it's not that far back. This is the park back in the 70s. And this is when you could access from all sides without a big slope. And I think a lot of people miss that, particularly on the east side, where you can't see into the park, and it creates a kind of a creepy kind of edge because you don't necessarily know you're going to be safe. So it discourages people from crossing the park and using the park. And this is another view of the same park. And the nice thing is how well it's used. People are scattered all throughout the park, enjoying the day. What I don't like about it, though, is if you look on the left-hand side, you can see stairs. And so there's a lot of barriers for people with disabilities, and I think we can do a better job of avoiding those sorts of things. This is a square that we redesigned a few years ago, and it's in Texas, and it's downtown Sulphur Springs, Texas, and there's a one-way pair going on the left side and the right side, and it's a Texas DOT truck route. And so we worked with the Texas DOT and the city and all the stakeholders, and we restored 2-way operations on all the streets. We removed all the vertical curves so people in wheelchairs and everybody can get around, and we made the streets out of brick to keep the speeds down. And lo and behold, the vacant buildings were filled up with businesses. People came back, foot traffic went up, and they had all these events, which wasn't happening before. And the folks that I've circled there are folks who have obviously some sort of mobility impairment because they have a mobility device. And there's probably all sorts of other people in the at the event who have similar conditions. But the space is completely accessible for everybody, so everyone can enjoy it. This is one of the streets that approaches the square, and the best thing about the street is the view at the end with that old courthouse. So we reconstructed the street, to make it walkable, shady, because it's a hot place, and we kept the view. And this view is important, and views in general when you're designing these sorts of places is really important. And that view draws you in because you want, hey, look what's down there. I wonder what's down there, and it sparks your curiosity. So down you go, and then when you get closer, you see medium views like this this memorial. And then when you get right into the park, there's these little micro views of little pieces of art and so forth. And so the idea is to keep things entertaining for the eye. And people use the space in all kinds of ways, like little picnics. There's a growing farmers market that happens every weekend, and it's a huge success. Kids come down, we call them free range kids because they're not escorted by parents, and they enjoy the park. The parents are perfectly comfortable letting them go. A lot of local artistic expression going on. That's very important in the community. So there's a guy doing some art on a wall to hide some utilities. There's the splash pad, gives kids something to do and brings their parents, helps fill up the restaurants. And this is an interesting story with that couple. They were walking down Main Street with a friend of mine looking for a venue for their wedding. And she stopped and said, you know, I'd really like to get married right here in the street. It's so beautiful. And so I think that's success, when people feel so strongly about the quality of the space that they're willing to get married in it. It's also a culturally diverse community. And this is the Cinco de Mayo celebration. It's the biggest celebration they have in the square. And they occupy all the streets on all the sides of the square. And because they're flush, nobody's tripping over curbs, and they can have a really big event. So let's take a look up top, and that's the existing park. And what we have there is some streets with a park in between. And what we're thinking is, this is different than the rest of Peachtree. Why can't we make it a space that it's not just a regular street experience, it's a whole giant plaza experience. The big lines are the macro views, and the little lines are the micro views. And it's important to draw people in by giving views of the beautiful architecture and some of the things that we actually place in the park. Here are some of the areas that we thought about. What we've done here is down by the Walgreens, we've taken out Edgewood and we've reoriented it towards Walton Street to get a nicer network of streets and to remove the complicated 5-point intersection down at the southwest. In the middle of the park, it's a sort of a quieter area of lawns and some of those legacy trees, the specimen trees, where you can go and relax. The excitement's around the edges, and this is part of the more contemplative part of the park. Then we have the sculpture garden in front of the art building. And then at the north end, we have more of a family type area with a splash pad or some sort of interactive art with play areas. There's 3 buildings we're proposing. One is up to the north end to hide what we call the bee activities that are happening just north of that. And 2 stories, so it doesn't spoil the view of the nice building, but it hides the back of the house. We've got the classic looking trolley station that we're proposing with a little clock tower on it. And at the bottom, we have my favorite, the beer garden, where there's refreshments and light food, public restrooms. Also, the building at the north end would probably have a visitor center with restrooms as well. There's lots of places for stages to set up, very flexible spaces, little spaces, big spaces, depending on what you want to do with the venue. The blue areas are what we call the shared zones. The orange areas are the comfort zones. So it's got a nice balance. All of the comfort zones on the edges are a little bit bigger, so that we have a lot more outdoor seating and what we call the refuges along the sides. So that's the overall idea. Very flexible, inviting space where you can go by yourself or go with a group or go to a public event and feel comfortable, whether you go on foot, transit, bike, or by car. And then let's talk about Margaret Mitchell Square, which is just north of the park. Very peculiar intersection with strange angled approaches. It's got a MARTA station to the north end, and it's got the tracks. The interesting thing about the tracks is they're lower than the sidewalk, and it forms a constraint. So this is going to be like half a flush space. The part on the west will be the flush part. We'll use Exhibition Road as our precedent, and you can see it's a beautiful shared space at the. If you zoom in the top drawing there, or the top image. On the bottom right, you can see the bus stop. So though the whole place is generally flush, it's not at the bus stop, so that people get on and off the bus more easily. That dark line on the left is a drain. This is how you get in from the side streets. It's just a simple ramp. There's no signals, no stop signs. You just come in. Now, I just want to point out that this is the other street from the other side. Again, just a nice simple ramp. That Exhibition Road wasn't always this nice. If you just go to the right, you can see how hostile it was for pedestrians. The sidewalks are too small. You'd have to walk in the street. There's a lot of museums and so forth. There's a real deterrent from wanting to go. And if you look up above, excessive speeds, car-oriented, noisy, difficult to cross. It wasn't a great place. So they changed the environment, and by changing the environment, you change behaviors, and you can get the sorts of courteousness and politeness that you want in your public realm. So again, at this area, we looked at the macro views and the micro views as well, and celebrated those. And you can see in blue that those are the shared zone, and the orange is the comfort zones. And what we've done is we've pulled Peachtree Street, because it's only 2 lanes, to the east, creating more distance between Forsyth and Peachtree, which allows us to change the geometry somewhat, such that Peachtree becomes the primary route. And now, if you could just highlight those 5 sculptures, I thought it'd be really cool to have a series of art pieces that kind of include the edge and also include the street. And these could be themed after, the symbols of Atlanta or some, famous people or whatever you would like. So those are some, again, just some starter ideas using some basic principles for the some of the key kind of bigger spaces in the south end of the corridor.
Thanks, Ian. I'm going to spend the next 5 or so minutes going over some activation strategies that we have Andrew Jones on, who's on our team from James Lima Planning and Development, to talk about some of his initial thoughts of activation strategies for this corridor. Andrew?
Thanks, Addie. So as I mentioned, I'm Andrew with James Lima Planning Development. We are kind of the programming and strategic advisors on this project. We typically help maximize the social and economic value of projects of this sort through kind of innovative strategies. So the first idea that we've come up with is to activate ground level public and private spaces. In conducting our analysis, we noticed that while Peachtree Street has a sizable number of businesses, very few of those businesses operate at the street level and kind of contribute to street life. There's obviously some logistical barriers that make it challenging for these businesses to move up to street spaces on their own. We've heard from some stakeholders that the kiosk program has some challenges that prevent businesses from spending very long time in those kiosks. One strategy that's been deployed elsewhere for overcoming that is providing capacity building grants and other incentives that help small businesses kind of be able to fill vacant retail spaces through pop-ups or other kind of creative activations, build out street dining or streetery setups, or even kind of construct their own pop-up kiosks that allow them to kind of capture a customer base through foot traffic. Next slide, please. So a disproportionately large share of the businesses along Peachtree Street are either chains or brands really oriented towards kind of tourists or non-local crowds. And in our experience, great main streets across the country really reflect the best local businesses that are in kind of the areas surrounding those main streets. Again, this is a bit of a chicken and an egg issue, as Megan mentioned previously. Without the residential base, it's sometimes challenging to attract those quality local businesses. However, cities like Cambridge have been exploring interesting relocation grant and other incentive programs to kind of make the economics work until the street becomes vibrant enough to support a customer base that can make the small businesses model work. So Atlanta's arguably one of the cultural capitals of America. It has so many dynamic, unique elements to it. However, very few of those are kind of reflected by the built environment on Peachtree Street. And again, great main streets kind of manifest the real distinguishing features of their city's culture. One thing that's been tried elsewhere is the Times Square Arts District, which essentially allows the entire Times Square Business Improvement District to become kind of a coordinated platform where the city can project its many identities and amplify its many voices. So one thing we're thinking about is kind of creating a coordinated public art strategy, again, that projects these identities, makes Peachtree Street a source of kind of civic pride, but also creates those kind of breadcrumbs and rewards that pull people down through the street and to the kind of ultimate reward, which is the shared space. And lastly, we think that Peachtree Street needs to grow its residential base to kind of cultivate a critical mass of users. When kind of conducting some analysis on the permanent residential population versus the daytime population, there is a stark gap. And this essentially limits Peachtree Street's operations in a number of ways. It kind of reduces opportunities for activations on nights and weekends. It basically ensures that local businesses will not open during those hours, missing out on potentially revenue generating hours of operations. And the thing is, this office and tourist population may not be back for a while in this post-COVID world, perhaps ever, if some of these Zoom trends become sticky enough. So cultivating a larger base of residents along Peachtree is kind of a strategy for creating a user base that's resistant to some of those potential dynamics. In Los Angeles, after they actually conducted a similar redesign process that widened sidewalks to create more programming space and kind of rebooted an old streetcar network, there was a boom of kind of office to residential conversions to kind of support the development of that space along South Broadway.
Thank you, Andrew. That was wonderful. I know we have been through quite a bit in this last 60 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Megan McMullen, to do a Mentimeter poll about what we've heard tonight. But I think we don't have that many folks on here, and I would love to just open it up. You can certainly, if you feel more comfortable, typing it in the chat, but we'd love to hear from you of some of what you've heard tonight. And are we heading in the right direction with some of our starter ideas? Are we missing something big, or is there something that we just haven't thought of before? I mean, we've spoken to a lot of people, but we haven't spoken to everybody. So we'd love to hear from y'all on some thoughts, initial thoughts this evening. You're muted, Megan.
Off mute. Exactly, Addie. So we just have 3 Mentimeter questions that we wanted to go through. So if we want to answer these and then spend a few minutes chatting about them afterwards, that would be great.
Let's do that.
So I think a lot of you have used this before, but the way it works, you go to menti, menti.com. And the code for tonight is 7474862. It'll ask you for that right when you
want to share your screen?
Oh, it says that I am sharing. You can't see it?
I can't. Oh, there we go. Oh,
I'll do it again.
It was sharing and then it wasn't. And maybe it's just user error. You're starting to share your screen. Yes. Ooh.
Okay, good. So the website and the code are both at the top there. Again, that's menti, menti.com, and the code 7474862. So the first question, we're trying to get at your priorities. We've talked about some different potential locations, and of course the idea being that we'll be making improvements throughout the corridor, but of the different segments that we've talked about, which one of these would you prioritize as the first location for a potential shared space downtown?
And can anybody else see it? Is it just my computer, but I can't see your screen? Is everybody else?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Okay, good.
It's just me. Good. Okay.
Sorry, Addie. I'd rather it be just you than just me.
I'll take the hit. I'll take it. Go for it.
All right. We've got some responses coming in. Love to see a few more before I really call it, because it's a little early. And if we've learned anything the past few weeks, it's don't call too early. But if anyone wants to chime in with some of the reasoning for why they're selecting the segment they are, feel free to take yourself off mute, or you can use the chat if you feel more comfortable with that. But we'd love to hear sort of your thinking behind your priorities.
Hi, this is Mark Earhart. I picked Peachtree Center first just because I feel like Woodruff Park has the park. It's kind of a pedestrian amenity, and that Peachtree Center has kind of, has less amenities. And then I see the Emory Hospital area and Connector Crossing area is more transportation corridors rather than, granted, pedestrians will be walking through it, but right now there's no, outside of the hospital, most people are crossing through it to go somewhere. And that there I would prioritize, kind of bike infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I've ridden through there before, and when the bike lane ends there at Pine Street,
Yeah.
It'd be great if it went all the way up to Ponce, where you have bike lane
Mm-hmm.
eventually on Ponce, but that connection to Midtown would be nice.
Definitely. Would love to see that become a continuous connection all the way up there.
Thank you.
Got a note in the chat. Costin agrees with you that Peachtree Center feels like the heart of Atlanta, and that if we start there, then it could potentially grow in either direction. So thinking strategically about that one.
And I see another comment, and maybe Andrew, you can answer this one, or you, Sean, who's also from James Lima's team. Where did I look? Does the resident number of 3,000 include adjacent streets in the area, such as Baker and Ivan Allen? And I'm going to guess you're speaking about Woodruff Park.
And so we took a 2-block buffer to the east and west of Peachtree Street in every direction. And that's how we generated the residential total for the corridor.
Great.
This is Matthew Peterson. Just curious, have you guys talked to the commercial business owners in Peachtree Center or the hotel GMs in Peachtree Center area? I know you hadn't talked to Emory yet, and you're working to talk to Emory this week. So I was just curious if you talked to commercial.
We're trying to get in touch with quite a few people. I think we're missing the gap with some small business owners, but we've talked to major property owners along the corridor, some office folks as well. So we'd like to talk to more people. So we're trying to get as many people as we can.
If you have any contacts with small business owners, that's sort of been a struggle to actually like get the individual to talk to. So feel free to send us that information. That would be super helpful.
Absolutely.
We recognize that during this time, it's there's a lot going on. So if you have any direct contact, that would be helpful.
Yep. Awesome. I'm going to scoot us over to the next question, but it looks like with the chat comments and the results here, there seems to be some consensus that segment 3 around Peachtree Center is the top choice. It really needs some TLC, followed by Woodruff Park, and then seeing those other segments as really needing some transportation improvements to get people there, but not quite the spot for the shared space. All right, so this question is open-ended. And so sort of thinking back on what we've been talking about this week, what you may have been imagining on your own that we haven't heard from you yet, the concepts that were just shared. What about this potential project is the most exciting to you? What's going to have you racing down there to go check it out the first day we peel off the construction tape?
And I see a question in the box, and I'm going to throw this out to Ian. So Ian, be ready. This is from Cedric. How does the design connect to multiple modes of transportation, specifically first and last mile to this shared space?
Yeah, good question. So first and last mile usually applies to transit. So if somebody comes down by MARTA, they'll get out at a stop, and how do they go from there to wherever their final destination is? And there's a bunch of ways: walk, bike, bike share, scooter share, Uber, Lyft. There's lots of the trolley. So there's lots of ways of doing that. And we're trying to create an environment where those modes are comfortable, and that the environment is safe, that there's shade, so that, and it's engaging to hold people's interest, so people will be able to comfortably and willingly walk further, ride further, scooter further in that kind of space. It is a complete street, so all those modes would be would be accommodated. So that's how we do it. Just really advantage the modes that help people go those last miles. And with regard to the TNZ companies, the Ubers and Lyfts and so forth, we're really thinking about that. If we had curbs, what we call curbside management, I guess it'd be edge side management or comfort zone management, where do we pick up and drop off? We're thinking on each side street. So there's the longest walk you would have would be half a block. So the average walk would be shorter than that. So that's the kind of thing we're thinking about to make it really convenient to take these other modes, and you can chain your trip together. I hope that helps out a little bit.
All right, we've got a few responses coming in from people. I see a number of people are excited for it feeling more walkable and oriented at modes other than cars. It's a great place to bike or take transit. Some shout outs for the greenery. People are excited to have it feel a little bit more wild and natural in this area that is currently a whole lot of concrete. Some people who are excited for breaking down barriers between businesses and people in the street and having more of that interaction along the way. More vibrancy, 24/7 feeling, something that is for locals and not just for tourists. We've got a skeptic saying it's a little too early to say, and our next question is for you. We want to hear your concerns as well. So don't be shy about that. Presenting the history of Atlanta through the space, not bowing to cars, streets for people. Yep, really making this a vibrant spot. Awesome. All right, I'm gonna move us on to our last question. All right, what elements are we missing? This could either be a physical element of something that you would like to see in the space, or it could be some other component of the project that you think needs to be addressed for us to get the outcomes that we're all really hoping for. I see Monique dropped in the chat. The email address for this project is peachtree@atlantaga.gov. And mentioning if you have any other contacts that you think we should talk to, please feel free to shoot us an email. As we mentioned before, this is just the beginning of the project and the beginning of our engagement. So the more people we can talk to, the more different perspectives we can have represented, the better. So that small business gap would be super helpful, but really anyone else that you think that we should talk to would be great. And sorry for the person I called a skeptic who was apparently not. Also mentioned it would have been okay if you were.
Oh.
Okay, so some elements that we may be missing: more water and stormwater features. Yep. Trees and quiet spaces, so more spots to sort of step away from the hustle bustle and calm yourself, feel still. Wide sidewalks. Yep. More comments about the green infrastructure and constructed wetlands. Grocery stores, yes, essential for that neighborhood feeling and being able to really just have your life lived nearby. Definitely more affordable housing, more visual representation of Atlanta history. Awesome. And if there are any specific stories, we've heard a few mentions of Atlanta history. If there are narratives that you think are important to our city that aren't represented, drop those in the chat or feel free to speak up.
Or email.
It's helpful if we can get that. Yeah, email and follow up if you after you're noodling on it for a little while.
Yep.
Yep. How are we going to support the homeless population downtown? Concerns about co-opting social spaces. All right. So I think there's definitely attention with that from some different perspectives that we've heard of the best way to be supportive and make sure that everybody feels welcome in the space. Heat mitigation for materials and strategies. More data and hospitality and commercial and transit worker input. Yep. We can focus on targeting some of those groups as we move forward, if we might have had some gaps this time. Okay, and then questions about how property owners view this, right? And needing them to be on board for it to be a quick win and a relatively seamless process. We've started talking to a number of them this week. Addie, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, we've spoken to several property owners this week, and for the, I won't say 100%, I think that's probably the case, but for the most part, they were just, the takeaway was, yes, please win, and what do I need to do to help you get this going? I think everybody recognizes Peachtree needs to be that special place, and that can really help incentivize a lot of the activity that's missing along the corridor as well. So the property owners that we have spoken to have been very, very supportive of whatever needs to happen along Peachtree Street to help bring back that vibrancy and that history to the street in the public realm. So we've had great support so far.
Okay, got a couple more comments that have come in. The Woodruff Park and Auburn Avenue intersection having a lot of potential to have that local history really reflected in the space. And possibly the consideration of 5 Points also being thought about as a shared street a little bit further south. And another mention for green infrastructure, which definitely, I don't want people to feel we've forgotten that. That'll just be a little bit more of a focus once we get into the design on the next workshop, but we totally agree. That's super important, not only for downtown, but also for the other surrounding neighborhoods. Knowing that Peachtree is a ridgeline and the runoff that happens there has impacts much beyond where it falls initially.
And actually, go ahead.
There's actually a whole Georgia Tech urban design studio working right now furiously towards their final review that has been looking at stormwater in all of downtown and south downtown that we are very interested in seeing.
Yep, super important. Awesome. Well, we have just a few minutes left. I want to open it up if anyone wanted to verbalize anything or build on some of the comments maybe they saw from other people.
I have a question. This is Mark Earhart again. Is interesting is the diversion of Peachtree Street around Woodruff Park is how realistic is that in terms of getting it done? I know there's probably tons of hurdles to do something like that.
There are tons of hurdles, and Kevin, you feel free to jump in, but I will say that over the course of time, Woodruff Park has undergone some massive changes. Particularly the last one was for the Olympics. You know, just looking at things change. It's a city, it's constantly evolving. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities, but it takes funding to do, obviously. That's why we've kind of provided like a range of interventions that could happen along Peachtree Street. But I don't think it's something that we can just discount and say that will never happen. I think there's real history behind changing our spaces.
Yeah, it's this whole project's incredibly aspirational, right? It's so if we want to, you know, especially at the very beginning, I think we have to think big. We have to think about, you know, 20, 30, 40 years from now, what are all of the pieces of this that this could be? And, you know, I'm almost kicking myself because even as we at the Atlanta City Studio, when we started it back, we never even thought about, you know, the interface with Woodruff Park. And so it's likely not the first thing that happens. It may not be the second or third thing that happens, but to think about, you know, if a shared space is really appropriate down there at that particular segment, you know, what would an incorporation of Woodruff Park look like in some grander idea?
Yeah, the park's been built a couple of times over its history, and I think we've learned a lot about open space and public design, about natural surveillance and, you know, feeling safe and whatnot. And I would be ashamed to reinforce, you know, some of the things that are holding back the potential of that area. So it'd be nice to know what we should do from first principles, and then at least not preclude it, would be my thinking.
Yeah, I understand if you dream big and get halfway to your dream, that's a considerable step in the right direction.
I mean, but you look at some place like Centennial Olympic Park, and the impetus behind that was the Olympics and the value and the investment that happened along there. It's not unheard of for Atlanta to dream big and actually do big. And I think, somebody said in our stakeholder meeting, we can have nice things. And I think that resonates. Not only nice things, but fun things and playful things, but things that bring us together and things that are reflective of our history and our community. And Peachtree Street is that special place.
Always start with what you want. There will be plenty of compromises along the way. So don't start from a compromised position.
Well, Kevin, do you want to wrap us up since we are 1 minute from time?
Sure. And I don't want to let this one last question, I think from Cedric or Cedric, I'm not sure which way you like your name pronounced. So feel free to correct me if you have a preference that you'd like me to use. But there was a mention about what design can be implemented to aid our homeless population. And I think there's two sides to that answer, and I'll let others opine as well. But one is just in the overall kind of thinking about the design of the space itself, and conversations that we've had about public space in Atlanta is if you design to keep certain people out, not just the homeless, that ostensibly you designed a place to keep everybody out and dissuade everybody from coming. And so we want to think about, really designing valuable spaces that are for everybody. And that's a starting point for that. But then there's specific design elements and things that you can think about incorporating. We heard lots of great ideas this week from different stakeholder interviews about, what do you think about, portable showers and other things to accommodate. And those are things to look at. And we've also talked with other advocacy groups that are, how do you connect individuals experiencing homeless or other issues in these spaces with resources? It's something we're experimenting in Woodruff Park right now with Central Atlanta Progress, as well as the boardwalk. So it'll be very much a part of this consideration going forward.
Now, I've been to a lot of parks where there's people who are homeless, and let's say there's 10 of them. And if I'm by myself, I might not be as comfortable, but if there's 1,000 other people enjoying the space, nobody minds. And, it's inclusive, and it's a public space for everybody, including people who are homeless. So I don't mind. But what I'd like to see is everybody enjoying the space. That would be the home run.
Thank you for answering that. This is Cedric speaking.
Thanks for being here tonight, Cedric.
No problem.
Thanks for your question. All right. Did you want me to bring it home?
Bring it home, Kevin.
All right. Well, thank you again, everybody, for attending tonight. It's for those of you that have been with us since night one. It's been a very busy and intense week, but a very productive week. And I think we're thrilled to the conversations that we've had, the progress that has been made, and to just let everybody know that this is the beginning. We're excited that we could have these conversations early, and we'll be looking forward to coming back again in January, at least for the next workshop, if you hear nothing from us in between, and you will, to talk more about getting into the design and refining that and how we've incorporated the thoughts and ideas. So stay tuned to definitely the website, sharepeachtree.com, as well as stay tuned to the Department of City Planning's social media channels. We're on Twitter and Facebook, and we'll be Instagram, all of them. And we will be posting lots of updates there. So thank you all very, very much for a great first week.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Care.